testing in RxJS, and I specifically wanted to drive home a point that I always feel when using RxJS. And that's, I guess it's generally true for testing, is that of course we have the notion of compile time, right? And we have these amazing tools like TypeScript that can really help us to catch issues early on. And then we have runtime, where we have all our validations and generally our code to sort of solve the issues. We have our eyes, manual testing, and of course exception handling in order to do that. So it's like a lot. So I'll just put a lot. But let's actually just say our own eyes, just to drive home the point of how we need this other time. It's not really named for it, but let's call it testing time, because there's just some things that we can't really see. So I thought about calling it testing time. I guess you could also call it imagined time, because there is a time in which it could be very visual or problematic, but maybe not today. And that's also kind of why we test, against different scenarios. And in this specific video, I wanted to sort of focus on timers and creating like a lot of different types of timers and see if they can actually pass the test of what a timer should be. But maybe in a future video, I can make it very practical by looking at things like concat map versus merge map and those kinds of things, or switch map, which really do have sort of their own issue to it. And my sort of philosophy with testing is always to think in terms of I always think of like games, like a card game. Like let's say you have two players in a card game, okay, and then when you draw, let's say, a 7. And I mean, you play with 2 players, but usually you play with like more players. When you draw a 7, it means you skip a player. And I always like to think of it like, what if you're playing the game with 2 people, instead of 3? Then skipping a player basically means nothing, right? You just go back to yourself. So why would you even have that rule? And I think that's kind of the way that I like to approach testing. I always think of it like test with 1, test with 2, and then sort of test with n, and then maybe the last one, and so on and so forth. So you kind of think about it a little bit like that. It's not always sort of 100% correct, and I'm not sure if I even did that in this test, but that's sort of how I like to approach testing. But yeah, that's sort of a little bit of a background. The other side of the video is just to try out cool timers and see how you can sort of make different timers and think about that conceptually, because I think time generally is a very interesting concept to sort of nail and to think about as well. And one of the cool things about testing with RxJS is that you actually can sort of virtualize time. You flatten the notion of time, and I think especially in RxJS, which is all about asynchronicity and being able to really orchestrate that, I think this is just sort of a good thing to do. So yeah, let's sort of dive into the different ideas of time. And for now, let's just turn off the tests, because the point is really to sort of drive home why we need to test in the first place, right? So just in case you're wondering, this first one, which is pretty straightforward, actually would succeed all the tests. And if you're interested, you can sort of pause and look at how I formulated the 3 tests and see if you agree with them. I tried to formulate them to the best of my abilities, but I will be sure to show them off as well later on in this video. So yeah, the first one, as we see visually, works pretty well. Just as you expect, it goes from 0 to 59, which would make a minute. That was sort of the goal, make it run for a minute. Use whole numbers, not milliseconds, so to say. And we start obviously counting from 0. If we're counting time, we start from 0. If we count things, we would start from 1, but we're counting time. So conceptually, we should start at 0 and then end up at 59. And obviously, we would go on to sort of reach 60, and then the moment we hit 60, we would reach minute 2, but we're not doing that for this video because we're trying to sort of simplify the concepts. So the second one, I will actually turn off some code that I introduced later after testing, you know, and I think that's really what drives home this point. Testing is like having a conversation with your code and seeing like, okay, I see that it works, but is it actually doing what I think it should be doing? So as you can see over here, we actually do have the same thing, and I think it starts, yeah, it starts at 0, nothing going on, and it just seems all fine, and you know, what's the problem? And you know, I guess we could speed it up, and I think it also ends at 59, just like the one before. So what's the problem here? And there is really no problem. Let me point out that first, that if you use this to I don't know, check if something took forever or whatever, you know, really not a problem. The point is that not everything is always as it seems, and everyone who knows interval can probably already tell, but you know, it might be that this is just that really annoying bug that you can't see. So what I did is I added this, right? But let's first actually start running the test and obviously see it fail. So we'll save that and fire up Jest there and see on the test that we have, and we'll specifically focus on the first one. Yeah, so let's scroll up a bit. There we are. A timer should start at 0, right? Well, it does start at 0, and then maybe I should have been a little bit more sharp in my formulation, but I think the devil is in the word start. And so I used marble testing for this. I think marble testing is sometimes very overkill. You can just use async tests as well, but I do think that marble testing is very important if you're really trying to nail some of RxJS. I think it's really great to learn some of the more deeper insights of RxJS and sort of how you go about that. So actually, the problem is not so much that our first value is not 0. The problem in this case is that our first value is actually emitted after 1,000 frames. And if we hover over interval, we can actually see that is what it does. I think is listed somewhere. Let me see. Let's see. Yeah, creates an observable that emits sequential numbers every interval times again. Periodic in time, returns blah 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 with a constant. First emission is not sent immediately, but only after the first period has passed. I mean, that is something that most people are not gonna be bothered with, and it's such a small thing. I don't know why that's the case. There must be a good reason as to why this is. I think, you know, they were maybe thinking a timer is where to go, not interval, and I totally agree with that. So I don't know why it skips that first cycle. But, you know, good thing about RxJS is that we can obviously stop that from happening, and this is really where it comes in good to sort of have a layered approach to explaining this. So what we do is we say start with 0, right? Because it's not like it actually didn't emit anything on the first frame. It's just that it didn't emit a value, right? So what we say is we just say like, okay, start with, so do start emitting that value. And once we do that, we get a good result on that first one, right? So you can see that happening. Yeah, so let's see. Yeah, so 2 passed, and now the only one that didn't pass is that we say a timer should at the 60th second emit a value of 59. And I really say value here because it's not a second really, it's really the value that we associate with time passing, you know, because we are we are aware of what a second is. It's just the value that we hang into it. And I think it makes a little bit more sense why I say value if we look also at virtualizing time and sort of what values of time really mean at that moment in time, so I would say. But yeah, so we do say that we need that, and obviously right now it's 58, which makes sense because although we did a start with at 0, and we do a take of 60, what happens obviously, and I do think we can see that in DOM, kind of. Actually, that's the thing, we still can't really, this actually drives the point perfectly about why we should be doing this in the first place. But there are 2 zero emissions right now happening, and we can't see that because of course it kind of hangs a little bit longer than it should, but we really wouldn't be able to tell. So again, we need to obviously map it that way, right? So how it works is that we will start with our zeroed value, and it's also the order of this is important, right? If we would put it here, it wouldn't work. So we start with our zeroed value, we do a +1 on every value since, and we take 60. By no means is this how I would implement this timer. I would obviously just use this one, but it's sort of to drive home the point. And once we do that, we are satisfied. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. And the next ones are kind of less about testing because they use mostly the same ideas as they are more about just showing different ways to do timers until we get to the last one. I think that one is really interesting. But yeah, here we go. So we are using a range. So I guess what is interesting here, not from a testing point of view, is that we are actually synchronously emitting these values, so they all come in at once, and then we use concat map to spread them out over time with delay. This might be something you want to look at for a little bit or try it out yourself. The basic idea to explain this is just all these values come in at once, and then concat map kind of takes each value and sort of buffers everyone until it sort of moves into the pipe, and then it's out, and then it sort of continues down here. I mean, this makes total sense to me, but I can understand that this is just the way. I wasn't intending to explain concat map in this video. I think concat map is best explained when we look at other operators like exhaust map, for example, because I think that just way more easier to understand. But yeah, this is just one other way to do a timer, and as you can see, all the tests are passing there as well. So yeah, this one uses the first recursive one. So these were all sort of based around the idea of a stream that emits values that it already inherently has. This one does not, and it actually just starts at 0 and then uses expand, which I do talk about in another video of mine, and then it sort of returns whatever it was +1 and then delay. So it's pretty straightforward, and it's a good way to think of expand. Make sure to always put in some kind of delaying logic or have your returned observable delayed in some natural way, because this will lock up your browser quite a lot. So let's take a little second and actually look at the tests, because I think it's a good time to do that. Let me just take this one on so it doesn't fail. So let's look at the first one. So yeah, so this is the other part of the video, right? This is marble testing. And I know that marble testing is really considered to be anything but pleasant. And I agree that it definitely has unpleasant sides to it. But there are some learnings that I can share here to make it more manageable. So one of the things that I don't like about marble testing is that you need to describe every value in the observable. It's very literal. If in this case, I thought what was interesting is we literally have 60 values, right? So we need to describe all of them, and you can see that when I take out this first. Right, so this test is all about the first one. I want the first one to start at 0. We saw that going wrong in one of the tests, so it's a useful test. But if we take that out, So if we take that out, we it is really good to do actually, because you do get a sense of how it works, right? You do see that it's quite successful in its own way, and that's often with marble testing. If you look at it, you're like, this works totally fine, but how can I make sure it gets tested? And that's sort of where my first tip comes in. Yeah, so you can definitely see that, at every frame it sort of admits, and then the value corresponds, and that's all good. So this all seems to work. But yeah, like I showed before, what I did, I actually just, and that's something you can just do. You can just take that stream that you're working on and just massage it to work for that specific use case, and that's really important. It's just like, okay, I just want the first value. Okay, that's all. That's all I care about, and then you can just create that expectation in your diagram. And if you wonder how this works, this is just a sort of concatenated complete. So this is complete, and then value, and that value is then later set here. So you say, okay, it should be 0, right? We want it to be 0. So if I would make this 1, then obviously it will fill. Okay, let's do a little back and forth between the code just to make it, to drive the point home. So obviously now it will fill, right? And then if we would take another one, let's do the interval one, because I guess that one is a little bit more. And let's say, let's not start with 0, but start with, well, we would still not have it because we would have the delay there. So we say start with 1. So now it should pass. I guess. Yeah, so it does. Obviously it's not an actual counter anymore because we don't start counting from 1, but it's kind of to drive home the point that what all the different parts are about. And yeah, if you're not familiar with marble testing, yeah, you could probably go in. I do have a nice example at the end of this video. I will just really quickly just take away some tests here, because that's, I think, was a pretty cool part. I'll just take this here, but I should have probably turned this off before I went into the thing. So there we are. Good. So yeah, this was a pretty interesting thing. So there we are. So what I wanted to show is that all the tests still pass. Although I took away some code, if you were really quick, you would probably be able to figure out what that was about. But I kept the best for last, I guess. So yeah, this one we've seen that works fine. Then we have the off with the expand, works fine. Oh, we're already at the last one. All right, so this one is interesting, right? So actually this one made me create a whole different test just because I couldn't get it to work. So let me show that one. Actually kind of turn off this test. So I don't know, let's use fit for that. So we only focus on that test because this one we've seen, this one works. All right, so actually I created this test specifically because of this implementation of the timer. Okay, so yeah, so this one passes. Okay, so yeah, it works. There it is. It works fine. So what it does is it uses defer, pretty powerful way to fire up your observable. Basically, what it does, it just wraps around an inner observable. So in this case, it's off. But instead of having sort of your evaluation of variables can be done at the moment of subscription, right? So this date thing gets evaluated the moment that this thing gets subscribed to, and that means that every time we sort of new it or some other component or whatever gets subscribed to it, then this would always have sort of the current date, right? So that's pretty nice. Yeah, so then we return it, and I do use defer in a practical way. I have some examples of like how it can be used in animation. It's very powerful, and I think it comes from game design, where I saw it the other day, like in some kind of Mario game, where they took like the beginning of a level and then they just started calculating the time from the moment the level started, and they started doing all kinds of references from that, like coin spinning and whatnot. I mean, I don't use it for that, but I think it's pretty cool that these fields intertwined there. But yeah, so basically that's the fur. And then yeah, sort of the magic of this one is that we do a delay. So we start with 0, although we don't really use it. And I think I could have called it whatever. Maybe not null, because null might skip it. Let me actually try that. It's interesting because null is kind of special in that sense. So null seems to work fine, actually. Yeah. So we use whatever. It doesn't really matter. This is not the point. This is just to fire off something, and then what it really boils down to, we probably could have used like what is it, empty? Yeah, we probably could have used empty. Oh, that doesn't work. Or is it never? Huh. I thought empty would have been the right one to use, I guess. No, it never admits. Yeah, we needed to admit at least once. So we just use off without anything. That would have been. I never did that, just off without anything. That's actually way better. Because then it's. That doesn't work. You need it. It needs to have something. Okay. I don't know if there's like an observable creation operator that can just be entirely nothing, kind of, but still emit one value. Because I think the problem with off in this sense is that you feel like this value has meaning, but it really doesn't. That's kind of why I don't like it. From? I haven't imported from. I haven't actually used it all quite a lot. I guess this could work. Anyway, I'm not here to debug something, but yeah, let's call it empty of that. So yeah, so the value doesn't matter. Basically, the delay matters. We do an initial delay. Actually, we don't do an initial delay, but we do a delay all the time when we do a repeat, and we do a start with again. Same pattern as what we've seen before. So what kind of works here is that we take the date then, and we take the date now, and we subtract it, divide it by 1,000, and we kind of floor it in order to make it a round number, and we get that. But the most interesting part about this was actually the testing of it, because that was really kind of a thing in and of itself. So I didn't have this test before. I only had sort of this test, but it failed on this one. So we can actually see that happening right now. So this is really sort of, again, about how can we make it work for us, because yeah, there are definitely some practical things around testing RxJS that are just not good. But I think it's nice to see some of them solved, that I sort of was able to solve in this one. But basically, so yeah, so the problem is that the value is constantly 0. And I was like, why is it 0? I just didn't really conceptually got it until I got it. And then it's like pretty easy to understand why it's 0. But just to show that it works for the others, although they are basically the same. It works for all the others. The test just passed for all the others, but not for that one. And it's not 0. It's actually the values it's supposed to be, but not 0. So yeah, it took me some time to figure that out, but I'll get back to the why. And if you're a smart cookie, you probably already figured it out, but yeah. So let's first focus on what test I wrote instead, because that one is actually not bad. It actually does most of the things that I want it to do. There's one downside to it, which I'll discuss, but basically, how I thought about it is more like also from the sort of the sentence, like what should a timer be? Well, it should it should emit 60 times in 60 seconds, right? That's what it should do. Otherwise, we didn't do it. Of course, the value of what it emitted could be anything here. So it could be cookies, it could be all zeros, as we saw in the other example, but at least it sort of had value. And this is a pattern I've seen quite a bit in testing. I don't use this operator normally. I don't really use it, but basically what it does, the way I like to see it is kind of reduce. So if you know scan and reduce, then this one should become pretty clear. But basically what happens is it just stores all the values into an array, and then when it's done, it completes, or it emits. Actually, it doesn't emit before it sort of fills up and completes, and then it emits, and then it gets to this one, and then I take the length from it, and then that length should obviously be 60 because it emitted 60 times. So I think it's pretty nice workaround, and I was like, okay, maybe that's it, but I couldn't let it go, and I really wanted to figure out why this thing wasn't working and why was it even 0 in the first place, right? So yeah, it was 0, and it's pretty obvious why it was 0. So the reason why it was 0 is because Jest, or the context of the test runner, has the notion of time and dates, but it doesn't actually have time, right? Because we are flattening time. We don't want time to be a thing, Time, if time would be an aspect in testing, besides its sort of more reflective nature, it would be terrible, right? Because you would have to wait for your tests forever. So the way I like to explain this, if you really don't get it, is like, think of a book, If you read a book, they can say like, oh, 5 years later, and it's 5 years later, right? It's not actually 5 years later, but it's 5 years later. That's how it works, right? So we are flattening time. And the way that we flatten time, we can do it in several different ways with async and things like that. But the way we do it in RxJS is just to use the test scheduler. Anything within this context, so basically this observable is now flattened. So it just gets these schedulers that sort of flatten time, and then it becomes expressible in this notion of frames. And we do use milliseconds, but again, this is milliseconds in the reflective form. So it's like we say that it is that, and you just say if that's true. Did so many frames actually happen since that moment? So yeah, what we need in the first place is we need sort of, this is Jest specific, but obviously it probably works the same in any other framework or library, but the point is just super easy, right? We need to set the system time to whatever. I just did my birthday, so yeah, that's my birthday, because it really doesn't matter. And then we need to advance it, right? Because obviously we need to advance it whenever a cycle ran, and we know that this cycle is correct because of the other test, right? We know that it emitted 60 times in 60 seconds, so we actually can just put that as a side effect in this stream right here. So we can just update it by 1000 every time. Sorry, I copied the whole thing and then I pasted the whole thing. So it should be one less, I guess. Let's see. One more. Tab. There we are. What is happening here? Let me put this on one-liner. This should be that. That should be that. This should go. There we are. There we are. So it was the it was the one sitting over there messing us up. Okay, yeah, but that might have given you some time to sort of look at it and think, yeah, that makes total sense. Oh yeah, so that advances time. I think we can maybe show it a little bit by advancing less time, I guess, because then it kind of makes sense how these values are intertwined. So you need to understand a little bit of what's happening between these values, but yeah. There we are, so we can see now, okay, it's at 59, it's 29, things like that. So yeah, obviously it only takes the last one. But yeah, that kind of concludes it. Besides that, there's not really much to it. It's just a bunch of timers, and yeah, it's kind of there to drive the point that obviously if you want to do a timer, then yeah, you probably just want to use this. And if you anyway want to do something really time specific, you probably don't want to get the concept of time in your client anyway. But yeah, if for some reason you need time and you need to sort of practice with RxJS, I think this is a good way to sort of get down on the concepts of RxJS, marble testing, and things like that. So yeah, I'll be sure to do a video about kind of practical examples of testing and more with higher order observables like merge map, concat map, those kind of things, because there it gets really interesting. This just been sort of a quick look at sort of challenging myself to make different kinds of clocks, doing a little bit of that expand stuff, which is really nice, and try to do it side effect free, and just think about it conceptually a bit, what it can do. So thank you so much, and yeah, if you have any questions or anything, you see this video or whatever, just reach out. I'll be sure to include some channels in the description.